You are not my daughter. You never were. I adopted you to hide what I did to your sister. I stood frozen on the train platform, my phone pressed so hard against my ear that my knuckles turned white. The man on the other end of the line, a stranger who had called me only 10 minutes earlier, was reading me a message my mother had written and never sent. A message she had saved in an old email draft for 25 years. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the words I had just heard. "How do you have this?" "My name is Daniel Reyes," the man said gently. "I think I might be your brother." The overnight train to Portland hissed as it pulled into the station behind me. Its lights cutting through the fog like something out of a dream I didn't want to wake from. I had boarded that train an hour earlier as Emily Carter, a 31-year-old woman going home for her mother's birthday. Now I wasn't sure who I was at all. "That's impossible," I said. "My mother has one daughter, me." "She has two," Daniel said. "And only one of us grew up knowing the truth." I sat down hard on the metal bench, my suitcase forgotten beside me. My heart pounding so loudly, I could hear it over the announcement calling for final boarding. 25 years. My mother had smiled at me every single day of my life while carrying a secret this heavy. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand who I was before that phone call shattered everything I thought I knew. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where in the world you're joining me from. Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you know to see people from all over the world sitting down to hear this story with me. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about a phone call on a train platform. It's about a woman who spent her whole life being loved by someone who is also lying to her. It's about a brother I never knew I had, a sister I never knew existed, and a secret so carefully buried that it took 2.5 decades and one chance encounter to bring it back into the light. And trust me, the deepest part of this secret, the part that changed everything, doesn't come out until much, much later. What my mother did wasn't just about hiding a birth. It was about protecting someone from the truth of what happened to my sister. And once you hear that part, you'll understand why she was willing to lie to me for 25 years. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and until that night on the train platform, I would have told you my life was simple in the best possible way. I work as a pediatric nurse at St. Vincent's Children's Hospital in Chicago, a job I fought hard to get and love with my whole heart. I grew up the only child of Margaret Carter, a quiet, careful woman who raised me alone after my father passed away when I was 6. My dream, since I was a little girl watching my mother nurse sick, neighbors back to health with nothing but chicken soup and patience, was to become a nurse who worked with children. I wanted to be the person a scared kid looked at in a hospital bed and felt safe with. I sacrificed a lot to get there. I worked 2 jobs through nursing school, slept 4 hours a night for 3 years straight, and missed more birthdays and holidays than I can count because I was covering someone else's shift to pay rent. My mother was proud of me, or at least that's what I always believed. She used to call me every Sunday without fail, and every Sunday she would say the same thing before hanging up. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emily." I used to think that was just a mother's love talking. I didn't know yet that those words carried a weight I couldn't have imagined, a debt she felt she owed to someone else entirely. The years before all of this fell apart were good years. Hard, but good. I remember the night I got my acceptance letter into the nursing program, how my mother cried at our kitchen table and held my hands like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. I remember my first paycheck, how I took her out to the only Italian restaurant in our small Ohio town, and she ordered the cheapest thing on the menu because she didn't want to make me spend too much. I remember the apartment we shared for years, small and cold in the winter, but always warm because of her. I remember how she never talked about my father much, how she changed the subject whenever I asked about her side of the family, how there were no photo albums from before I was 5 years old. At the time, I told myself grief does strange things to memory. I never once suspected that the silence wasn't grief at all. It was guilt. I built a good life. A career I loved, a small apartment of my own in Chicago, a relationship with my mother that I believed was honest and whole. I thought I knew everything about where I came from. I was wrong about almost all of it. The call came on a Thursday evening, 3 days before I was supposed to take that overnight train to see my mother for her 60th birthday. I was folding laundry in my apartment when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Emily Carter?" the man's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Daniel Reyes. I found your name through a DNA testing site. I think we might be related." I laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded like a scam. "I think you have the wrong person. Your mother's name is Margaret Whitfield, before she changed her name to Carter." The laundry basket slipped out of my hands. My mother's maiden name was Whitfield. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over a decade, not since I found it once on an old insurance document and asked her about it. Only for her to say it was a name from a marriage that didn't matter anymore. She had never mentioned a first husband. She had certainly never mentioned another child. "How do you know that name?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because she's my mother, too." I hung up the phone. I told myself it was a mistake, a coincidence, a con artist fishing for information. But 3 days later, standing on that train platform with my suitcase and my birthday gift for my mother tucked under my arm, Daniel called again. And this time, he didn't just give me a name. He gave me the words from an old email draft he had somehow gotten access to, words my mother had written to herself and never had the courage to send to anyone. That was the moment everything I thought I understood about my family collapsed onto the platform floor with me. To understand what happened next, you have to understand who my mother really was before she became Margaret Carter, quiet nurse's aide and doting single mother from Ohio. 28 years ago, she was Margaret Whitfield, a young mother of two living in a small town outside Cleveland with her husband, Robert Whitfield. Their first child was a daughter named Grace, born 3 years before me. Their second child, born a year after Grace, was a son, Daniel. According to what Daniel eventually pieced together and shared with me, our father Robert was a violent man. The kind of man who smiled at church on Sundays and terrified his family behind closed doors every other day of the week. My mother endured years of abuse, staying because she believed leaving would cost her the children entirely. That a judge would side with a respected businessman over a housewife with no income of her own. The night everything changed, according to records Daniel later obtained, there was a fire at the Whitfield home. Grace, only 4 years old at the time, did not survive it. The official report called it an accident, faulty wiring in an old farmhouse. But my mother knew the truth, because she was the one who said it, not to hurt her daughter, but to hurt the man who had trapped them all. Not realizing Grace had wandered back inside for her stuffed rabbit before the fire truly caught. My mother never forgave herself. She fled that same night with baby Daniel, but in her grief and her panic, she made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She left Daniel with her own sister in Cleveland, believing, wrongly, that she was too broken and too guilty to raise a child, that she would only bring him more pain. She disappeared, changed her name to Carter, moved 3 states away, and 2 years later she met my father, a kind and gentle man named Thomas Carter, and had me. She used to say I was the best thing that ever happened to her. Now I understood the second half of that sentence she never said out loud. I was also her second chance, the daughter she was determined to raise right after failing the first one so completely. Daniel grew up believing his mother had died. His aunt told him that lie to spare him the pain of abandonment, and he only discovered the truth after his aunt passed away last year and he found old letters in her belongings. Letters my mother had sent for years, begging for updates, sending money anonymously, never once asking to see him because she believed she didn't deserve to. "She's been sending money my whole life," Daniel told me, his voice heavy over the phone. "I always thought it was some estate fund, it was her." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the train station until the next morning, staring at old photographs Daniel had texted me, pictures of a woman who looked exactly like my mother but younger, standing beside a little boy with the same eyes as mine. When I finally arrived at my mother's house the next afternoon, 3 days later than planned, I didn't bring the birthday cake I had picked out. I brought a folder of printed emails and a photograph of a brother she had spent 25 years pretending didn't exist. My mother opened the door with a smile that fell the instant she saw my face. "Emily, sweetheart, you're late." I was starting to worry. "Who is Daniel Reyes?" I asked. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might collapse right there on the porch. "Where did you hear that name?" "He called me. He told me about Grace. He told me about the fire." My voice broke on the last word. "He told me everything, Mom." She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. "Emily, please come inside, let me explain." "You've had 25 years to explain," I shouted, the folder shaking in my hands. 25 years, and every single Sunday you called me and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to you. Was that true? Or was I just supposed to make up for what you did to them? "That is not fair," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "You don't understand what that night was like, what your father put us through. I understand you left a baby with your sister and let him grow up believing you were dead. I understand you had a daughter who died in a fire you started. And I understand that you looked at me every single day of my life and decided I didn't deserve to know any of it." She reached for my hand, and I pulled away. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as the woman who raised me, but as a stranger holding a secret so large, it had shaped every version of our relationship without my knowledge or consent. In the weeks after that confrontation, I stopped taking her calls. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts at the hospital, anything to avoid sitting alone with the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. But Daniel and I began talking almost every day, slowly, carefully, two strangers trying to figure out what it meant to be siblings after a lifetime apart. Then my mother started showing up uninvited. First at my apartment, standing outside my door with grocery bags of my childhood favorite foods like an offering. I didn't let her in. Then at the hospital, waiting in the lobby during my shift changes, until security had to gently ask her to leave. Each time, her explanations grew more desperate, more tangled, contradicting things she had told me the time before. "I was protecting you," she said once. "I was protecting Daniel," she said another time. Eventually, in a moment of raw, ugly honesty during a phone call I shouldn't have answered, she said the thing that finally broke something in me for good. "I couldn't look at him without seeing that fire, Emily. I couldn't raise a reminder of what I did. You were supposed to be my clean start." I wasn't her daughter in that moment. I was an eraser. Daniel flew to Chicago 2 weeks later, and we met in person for the first time at a small coffee shop near my apartment. He looked so much like the photographs of my mother's younger self that it startled me, and for a strange, disorienting moment, I felt like I was looking at family I had always been missing without knowing it. "She reached out to my aunt for legal help before her sister passed," Daniel told me quietly, sliding a folder across the table between us. "A lawyer's letter about the fire report. I think she's been trying to change the official story for years. Make it look purely accidental, seal the file completely. I think she's scared someone will reopen it." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an emotional secret anymore. My mother had been actively working, for years, to bury evidence about the night Grace died, and now that Daniel and I had found each other, she was terrified the truth would resurface in a way she couldn't control. I made a decision that afternoon that I never thought I would make about my own mother. I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Alvarez, a family law and civil records attorney who specialized in exactly these kinds of decades-old cases. I brought her everything: the emails, the photographs, the lawyer's letter Daniel had found, my mother's own contradicting statements which I had, without fully planning to, started recording during our last few conversations, because something in my gut told me I would need proof one day. This isn't about punishing her legally, Patricia told me during our first meeting, her office quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. The statute of limitations on most of what happened that night has long passed. This is about getting an honest record. About making sure Daniel finally has the truth he's owed, in writing, official, undeniable. We also found Grace. Not alive, of course, but her original death certificate, filed under her real name before my mother's identity change, sitting quietly in a county records office 3 states away. Waiting 28 years for someone to come looking. I didn't tell my mother any of this. I let her keep believing I had gone quiet out of hurt and confusion. I let her keep showing up at my door with peace offerings while I built a case, not against her exactly, but for the truth. For Daniel. For a little girl named Grace who never got to grow up and whose entire existence had been quietly erased from every conversation in my childhood home. I invited my mother to dinner. I told her it was time to talk, really talk, and I asked her to come to my apartment on a Saturday evening. What she didn't know was that Daniel would be there too, sitting quietly in my kitchen when she arrived, along with Patricia, who waited in the next room with a folder of documents neither Daniel nor I had shown my mother yet. My mother walked in wearing the soft blue sweater I had given her for Christmas years ago, her face hopeful in a way that made my chest ache despite everything. "Emily, I'm so glad you called. I really think we can move past this if we just..." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Daniel sitting at my kitchen table. The color drained from her face for the second time in a month. "Daniel," she whispered. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice steady in a way I admired deeply. "It's been a while." She looked between the two of us, her hands trembling at her sides. "What is this, an ambush?" "It's a conversation," I said. "The one you've owed both of us for 25 years. She sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You don't understand what that night did to me, what it took from me. I have lived every single day since with the sound of that fire in my ears." "Then why keep lying?" Daniel asked quietly. "If it hurt you that much, why not just tell the truth? Why let me grow up thinking my mother was dead? Because the truth would have destroyed you the way it destroyed me," she cried out, and for a moment I almost softened. I almost let the old instinct to protect her take over, the way it always had. And then she said the thing that changed the entire room. "I paid a man to help me change the fire report. To make sure no one ever looked too closely at what really happened that night. If the truth came out properly, Daniel, they could have taken you away too. I did what I had to do to keep at least one of you." The room went silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. "You falsified a death investigation," I said slowly, the words tasting foreign and heavy in my mouth. "You paid someone to cover up how your daughter actually died." My mother's face crumbled. "I was protecting our family." "No," I said, my voice shaking but certain now in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "You were protecting yourself." That was when Patricia walked in from the next room, a folder in her hands. And my mother's eyes went wide with a fear I had never once seen on her face in 31 years of knowing her. "Margaret Whitfield," Patricia said calmly, laying the folder on the table. "I've spent the last 2 weeks working with Daniel and Emily to formally request the original county fire investigation file from 28 years ago. It's already been reopened for administrative review based on new information regarding falsification of records." "You had no right," my mother whispered, staring at me like I was a stranger. "I had every right," I said. "Grace had a right to have the truth told about her. Daniel had a right to grow up knowing his mother was alive. And I had a right to know who I actually was instead of being raised as your do-over." My mother's hands shook as she opened the folder, and what she found inside wasn't a criminal charge. Because Patricia had made clear from the start that wasn't the goal, and honestly, given how much time had passed and the tragic complexity of that night, it likely never would have held up regardless. What she found instead was worse, in its own quiet way. It was Grace's real, corrected death certificate, her actual name restored, The original accidental circumstances noted honestly instead of the sanitized version my mother had paid to create. It was a letter from the county acknowledging the record correction. It was, in the plainest terms possible, the truth, finally written down where it could never be hidden again. "I did this to survive," my mother said, tears falling freely now. "I did this because I didn't know how else to keep going after what happened to her." "I know," I said, and I meant it, because underneath every layer of anger I had built over the past month, I did understand the terror of a young mother trapped in an abusive marriage, desperate and broken in the worst night of her life. But surviving doesn't give you the right to build my entire life on top of a lie you never planned to tell me. She looked at Daniel, reaching a trembling hand toward him. "Can you ever forgive me?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he finally said, "but I'd like the chance to find out, not through more secrets. Just the truth from now on." 3 months later, I stood in my mother's small backyard in Ohio, watching Daniel help her plant a small maple tree near the fence line. A quiet memorial for the sister neither of us had ever truly gotten to know. My mother had entered therapy, real therapy, twice a week, working through decades of guilt she had buried under lies instead of facing. She had also, at Patricia's gentle insistence, written and sent a full, honest letter to Grace's surviving records, closing a chapter that had stayed painfully open for nearly 3 decades. 6 months later, Daniel moved to Chicago, just 20 minutes from my apartment, and we started doing something we had never gotten the chance to do as children. We got to be siblings, ordinary and unremarkable in the best possible way, arguing over restaurant choices and showing up for each other's small, ordinary Tuesdays. My relationship with my mother is still healing. It may never fully return to what it was, because what it was, I now understand, was built on a foundation I never consented to. But it is honest now, for the first time in my entire life, and there is a strange, fragile piece in that honesty that I wouldn't trade for the comfortable lie I lived with before. 1 year later, on what would have been Grace's 32nd birthday, the three of us, my mother, Daniel, and I, sat together at that same kitchen table where the truth first came fully into the light, and for once, nobody was hiding anything at all. If you were in my position, discovering a sibling you never knew existed, and a truth your parent had buried for 25 years, would you have forgiven her the way I chose to? Or would you have walked away for good? I'd really love to hear your honest thoughts down in the comments, because stories like this only mean something when we talk about them together. If this story moved you, even a little, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more real, emotional stories just like this one. And if you want to see what happens in tomorrow's story, I promise you, it's one you won't want to miss.